The New York Giants have a backup quarterback. What does that mean, though, for any potential plans to draft a quarterback? We'll go into that. Plus, we'll find out more about the X's and O's regarding the said quarterback and one of the new offensive linemen. That's all coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network. And I want to send a big welcome in to our Blue Crew community members, our newcomers, our everydayers, and everybody in between. You're all appreciated and loved by yours truly. Thank you for making us your first listener today, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And please, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel. Click that little bell for notifications anytime I post something new. And be sure to like this video. It would help us tremendously, and it is appreciated. All right, so on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we've got a lot to go through. We're going to start off with the Giants signing of quarterback Drew Lock. What does that mean for the position, for the short and long term of the franchise? Then we're going to, in segment 2, we're going to hear from Locked On Seahawks host Corbin Smith, who gives us a little bit more insight into what the Giants are getting in Drew Lock. So we had a really good conversation, and Corbin did a great job in outlining Lock's strengths, his weaknesses, and so on. Then in segment 3, Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers comes on the program with me, and we talk about Jon Runyan Jr., one of the offensive linemen that the Giants signed. And spoiler alert, on Giants Country on Wednesday, Coach Gene Clemens has his good, great, and ugly feature that he does for all new acquisitions, and he takes a deep dive into Jon Runyan's film to tell us what to like and what's not to like. So anyway, that is our agenda here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Let's get into it because we've got so much to go through. We'll start off, obviously, with the signing of Drew Lock. What does this mean for the quarterback position going forward? The answer is, if you're worried that the Giants are not going to draft the quarterback, don't be. Drew Lock is signed for 1 year. I think it's up to what he can earn up to $5 million, I think it is. Which I'm sure, I haven't seen the contract yet, but when I get it, I'm going to look at the numbers and break them all down for you. It's probably similar to what Tyrod Taylor had with escalators for play time and certain metrics. So once I get the details, I will break all that down for you here on the podcast. But Drew Lock, as I see it, I think he's going to be competition for Daniel Jones this coming year. Now, I know Daniel Jones, he's on the roster regardless. We've established that the cap number that he has makes it impossible for the Giants to cut him. But just because, he has such a high cap number doesn't necessarily mean he has to be the starter. Go back to what Joe Shane said earlier in the year when asked about Daniel Jones. He said the expectation is that Daniel Jones, once healthy, will be the starter. Now, I do believe that the Giants would like to give Daniel Jones the opportunity to be the starter. I do not, however, believe that they should just hand the job to him the moment he is declared healthy. Look, for years when we had the previous regimes on this team giving away scholarships to draft picks or guys with big contracts ran rampant in the organization. And no disrespect to Jones, he's a hard worker. I get it. First round draft pick from 2019. I get it. Has the big cap number. I get it. But I think we could all agree he's probably not a top 10 quarterback. Based on how he played last year, Can we even say he was a top 15? And look, I get it. The offensive line stunk. Saquon Barkley was missing for part of the year. Darren Waller was missing. But good quarterbacks figure out a way to overcome the shortcomings. And you watched Daniel Jones last year, and how many times did he look uncertain? He looked skittish, and he just looked like, the lost soul that we had seen in the years prior to 2022 when he finally looked like he could be a capable quarterback. So if I'm the Giants, I say, okay, you know what? This competition is wide open. If Daniel Jones is healthy, you have a competition. Can Drew Lock beat him out? That remains to be seen. Drew Lock was not able to beat out Geno Smith out in Seattle. Doesn't mean that Drew Lock is a bad quarterback. All right. Drew Lock has some elements, and again, we'll hear about it in the next segment from Corbin Smith, that make him an intriguing option at quarterback. So I do think that Lock will compete because Jones needs to be pushed. I'm sorry. He just needs to. And if Drew Lock outplays him, so what? Some people are going to say, oh, now you're going to have a $47 million quarterback sitting on the bench doing nothing. Well, didn't they have Eli Manning at $19 million a few years ago, sitting on the bench carrying a clipboard? So it's not out of the question. You don't want it to be that way, but if it happens, you want the best guy in there. And if Drew Lock proves to be the best guy, then so be it. Now, what does this mean for the draft? Does this mean that the Giants are not going to draft a quarterback, or maybe they're going to pick up one of these developmental guys on day 3 and hope that he develops into something? I personally think that the Giants, and I never believed the Giants were going to trade up, by the way. I know there had been talk about them possibly doing it, but I think given the fact that they traded away one of their second-round picks in the Brian Burns acquisition, I think we can forget about the Giants trading up. What I think the Giants are going to do at quarterback, and what I think makes sense, is there's like a second tier of quarterbacks. We know the top dogs are Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. Some people will put J.J. McCarthy in that group. I'm thinking now the Giants will probably look into that second level where you will find like a Spencer Rattler, a Bo Nix, a Michael Penix Jr., and maybe grab one of those guys with the intention of, okay, they're going to sit, they're going to develop for the entire year, because, unless Jones and Locke, and, we got to throw Tommy DeVito in there because DeVito's not necessarily going to get kicked to the curb. He's going to get a chance to compete as well for a roster spot. But unless the first 2 quarterbacks are injured, kind of like what was the case last year, the rookie that the Giants draft, and I do believe they're going to draft somebody, he's going to sit for the entire year. Let him develop, let him take his reps, let him learn, acclimate and all that stuff. Then after this year, you see where you're at with the quarterback. Has Drew Lock proven his value that you bring him back as a backup? Which is certainly a possibility. See how he does throughout the year. Do you move on from Daniel Jones? Because remember, the escape hatch in Daniel Jones's contract is after this year. So if Jones, doesn't do well, you say, okay, Daniel, thanks, but it's just not working out. We're moving on. Or if Daniel Jones ends up getting hurt again, which, is certainly, given his history, something that they've got to be concerned with, you move on that way. So I think what the Giants have done, just to summarize it all up, is adding Drew Lock. They've given themselves, an extra layer of protection. Lock is a guy who, although he doesn't have a winning record as a starting quarterback in the league, he's got some potential. And I think as a short-term solution, he can possibly go in there. Would the Giants be able to be competitive with him for an entire season? Probably. Would they win a lot of games? That depends. There's still, tweaking going on with the roster. But look, let's be real, folks. Was anybody really expecting the Giants to be, a Super Bowl contender this coming season? Team still has a lot of holes to address. They still have a lot of questions that need to be answered. So I think, if they go and they add a young quarterback in the draft, again, from that second tier group, then, Joe Shane, Brian Dable, they'll continue to buy themselves some time, get that kid ready, develop him, because look, quarterbacks don't develop overnight. It takes time. And I think that's what the Giants are looking at here. They're looking at this whole process as more of a long-term thing as opposed to an overnight fix. And it's just a matter of being patient. And I know, look, we've all sat through the bad football. We all would like to see the Giants win. I'd love to see the Giants win. I'd love to get some postseason action here on the podcast as well as over on Giants Country. But sometimes, it's just not possible. You've got to look at the circumstances and the direction in which they're going. And I think when it comes to quarterback, the Giants are looking at this from the long term, hoping that Daniel Jones works out. But again, you've got to take his injury situation into consideration. That is a very real concern. And so now with Drew Lock on board, they have some insurance, veteran insurance that, they'll continue to develop. Go get a quarterback, on day 2 at some point and develop him, and then just build everything up. And meanwhile, you give your offensive line a chance to gel. You get, if you get a new receiver at 6, you give that guy a chance to get acclimated. The defense continues to come together. You just continue to build up the roster, which last year just grossly underperformed. All right, coming up next, Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks joins me, and he's going to get into it a little deeper on what Drew Lock brings to the table. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so that you can do more of it. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you find your assigned therapist isn't a match, you can switch at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and as promised, we're going to take a look at some of the newcomers to the New York Giants, guys that they have agreed to terms with in free agency. And up first, we're going to talk about quarterback Drew Lock, who, of course, we talked about in the last segment a little bit. And joining me to give us the lowdown on Drew Lock is Corbin Smith. He is the host of Locked On Seahawks. And he also, of course, writes for the sister site over for Seattle site on the Fan Nation Network. So, Corbin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, Corbin. So, Drew Lock, acquired in a trade, part of the Russell Wilson trade, competed with Geno Smith, I believe, last year for the starting job, or a couple of years ago for the starting job. Didn't get it. What can you tell us about Drew Lock's game? How has it evolved since his days in Denver?
I think the biggest area of improvement for Drew Lock has been his decision-making, because that was really what unraveled his situation in Denver when he was given the opportunity to be the franchise quarterback. In 2021, actually it was 2020, he led the NFL in interceptions that season. And so he had issues with trusting his arm too much. And he has a cannon. The guy can throw the football anywhere on the field, 70 yards downfield with a deep ball. He's got the arm strength, but he trusted it too much early in his career. He would throw into double and triple coverage. That led to a lot of interceptions. And even in training camp with the Seahawks a couple years ago when he was competing against Geno Smith, that to me was one of the big deciding factors that led to Geno Smith winning that job. Is he just did a better job with the decision-making aspect and taking care of the football. But when Drew Lock had his chances to play last year, he didn't get any snaps in 2023 or 2022. This past season, he played in 4 games. He had 2 starts. He led them to a comeback victory over the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday Night Football. So he showed off his clutch gene. And in that game, completed over 70% of his passes, didn't have any interceptions. You just saw him running the offense comfortably, and he wasn't trying to do too much. And late in the game, he showed off his arm with a couple deep balls on that game-winning drive, including hitting Jackson Smith and Jigba for the game-winning touchdown inside a minute to play. So the arm strength, underrated athleticism, those areas have always been in his game. But I think in Seattle, where he improved the most behind the scenes was his decision-making. And I think that's going to make it for an interesting quarterback competition in New York, because I don't know how you feel about this, Patricia, but I think this is truly going to be a competition, whether Daniel Jones is fully healthy or not. I don't think the Giants are signing Drew Lock just to hold a clipboard. They're going to give him a chance to win this job.
Yeah, I think that it would certainly behoove them to have a competition, although General Manager Joe Shane has said that the expectation, not it will happen, but the expectation is that once he is healthy, recovered from that ACL injury, Daniel Jones will be the starter. But of course, we'll see. Expectations change. I expect to live to be 100. Doesn't mean that I'm going to live to be 100, as they say. Corbin, when you look at the type of offense the Giants run, what makes Drew Lock a potential fit for that system?
I think the first thing that really jumps out is the arm talent. And I think that Drew Lock is one of those quarterbacks that when he is on and he's making good decisions, the physical tools are there for him to succeed in any offense because he can make all the throws. It's just been an issue with consistency and decision-making. I also think the fact that he's an underrated athlete. Now, he's not Daniel Jones caliber athlete, at least what Jones was before tearing his ACL. We'll see what he injury. Drew Lock is slippery getting out of the pocket. He does have the ability to take off and run occasionally, and he can extend plays. So he has a lot of traits that I think would fit in with a number of offenses, but especially in this one in New York, complementing the run game with his mobility, the ability to get outside of the pocket. And you're going to be able to take some deep shots downfield, which I think the Giants want to be able to do that, but that has not been a strength for Daniel Jones, even dating back to his time at Duke. He is not known for his ability to connect on a bunch of deep balls downfield. Drew Lock can take those shots, and he can deliver the goods when he has time in the pocket. So I think that those are the things that jump out that would make it that he's got some scheme flexibility. And I certainly think that the Giants have a system in place where his arm talents are going to be well equipped to run that system effectively.
What about the intangibles? Obviously, you know, Drew Lock at once upon a time was a starter for Denver. He tried to win the starting job in Seattle. It didn't work out. How has he evolved maturity-wise in that if he doesn't get the starting job in New York, how would he handle it? Is he going to be a sulker? Is he, you know, how would he go about it?
Well, he's already lost 2 quarterback competitions in his career, and he's handled both of them with grace. I mean, he and Geno Smith actually became extremely good friends, even though Geno Smith ended up winning that starting job. When Drew Lock got the chance to start in place of an injured Geno Smith in December, who was the biggest advocate for him on the sidelines? It was none other than Geno Smith. He was over there celebrating. He was helping coach him up, doing everything that he could. So there was no bad blood there. Drew Lock was okay with the fact, hey, Geno Smith won this job. He had been here before me. He knew the offense. Drew Lock had some bad luck. He got sick with COVID midway through training camp that year and missed a preseason game that he was supposed to start. So who knows how that changed the timeline. I think Geno Smith would have won the job anyway, but you're not going to see him sulk if he has to fade back into a backup role. But he's not going to be going into this thinking that that's what he's playing for. This is going to be a great opportunity for him to push Daniel Jones. And if Jones is not right or just doesn't respond from that injury, then the Giants may have a difficult decision on their hands, because you can make an argument that Drew Lock has better physical tools overall as a quarterback than what Daniel Jones does. So I think it could be fascinating seeing how this unfolds.
At this point in Drew Lock's career, what is the 1 or 2 things that maybe the coaching staff, the Giants coaching staff, still needs to be on the lookout, still needs to be concerned about?
You got to be worried about regression with the decision-making, because I do think, and this is with all quarterbacks that have a big arm, like there comes a point where your confidence can become overconfidence. And I didn't see that from Drew Lock in Seattle when he had his opportunities to play. A couple of his interceptions he threw last year were bad luck more than anything. But in the preseason, you saw him uncork some throws that you're like, what was he doing? What was he looking at there? So that's got to always be the big thing when you're coaching Drew Lock is you've got to keep hammering on that. Hey, let's be smart with the football. I want you to be aggressive, but not to the point where you're trusting your arm so much that you're throwing into double and triple coverage all the time. You can't get away with that in the NFL. And so I think that is certainly a big deal. And I would also consider going into this quarterback competition in New York. The other thing that you maybe have to be a little bit concerned about is sometimes Drew Lock likes to hold on to the football a little bit too long. And that's been an issue dating back to his time at Missouri. And you see that a lot with guys like this that can wing the ball downfield. He wants to buy himself time to do that. But sometimes you just got to get rid of the football. And that was an issue even last year when he started for Geno Smith that led to some sacks and some pressures that probably shouldn't have happened if he would have unloaded the football.
In terms of his mechanics, his footwork, and all that good stuff, what, if anything, do you feel that the Giants might need to tweak in order to get him to be even more effective than what he has shown to be?
Sometimes he gets a little bit too comfortable throwing off platform. I think when he is on platform, his mechanics are excellent, to be honest with you. I think that he has that picturesque throwing motion and the ability to throw a 50-yard bomb with ease. He has those kind of physical tools, but he does have his moments where I think it goes back to that trust in his arm that he doesn't fully set up, doesn't get his feet set, doesn't square up. And that can lead to some misfires throwing the football. It can lead to his shoulder dipping way it's not supposed to. But when he is on platform and he's squared up, mechanics are not normally an issue. So that's what you just got to make sure you're looking for is, hey, we know you can throw off platform, but if you don't need to, then don't. And that's really going to be a teaching point, I think, throughout the rest of his career.
All right, now final question for you. You know the New York market is not like Seattle. It's not like Denver. It can eat you alive if you do not have the moxie, if you will, to stand up and ignore things. That being said, having covered Drew Lock, what kind of personality is he, and do you think he has, the inner strength to kind of put aside the noise that tends to rise up, especially around the quarterback situation, if Drew, of course, were to win the quarterback spot?
He's really a free spirit is the best way that I would describe him. So I don't know, this is something that is kind of going to be a little bit of an experiment because I think that he has been hardened by the experiences that he's had to deal with. He's had a lot of adversity in his career, being a starter originally in Denver and then losing to Teddy Bridgewater and then losing the job in Seattle to Geno Smith. I mean, he has been through a lot of adversity. And so I think that from that sense, he's going to be ready for this. He's just going to be grateful for the opportunity to compete for a starting job. At the same time, he is kind of laid back. He has kind of a fun, goofy personality. I don't know necessarily how he would respond to being grilled by New York media. So that is one area that I can't necessarily answer for you. I think he's a very likable guy. Teammates love him. He's got a great personality. I just don't necessarily know. That's going to be something we're going to have to find out how he handles New York media because it is a far different animal than what he's been dealing with in Denver and Seattle as far as how the media handles quarterbacks and the pressure that comes with that.
And if he's expecting everybody to be gentle on him, not going to happen. We've seen, most people that come to the New York media, the New York market, they're able to handle it. Though you do get some guys who are ultra sensitive. And I guess, as long as Drew Lock is not going to be the type that, takes offense if he gets booed or, if he gets ripped in the press, I think he'll probably be okay. Right.
Yeah, I don't think that those will be issues for him necessarily. He'll probably just smile and move on. Yeah, he's just kind of a free-flowing personality, and he's a fun interview, and he's pretty open about things too. So I think from that standpoint that any media will be enjoying the opportunity to cover him.
Well, I can't wait to see what he brings to the table. It's always fun to see them up close and personal. So, which we will do, obviously, when we get to the OTAs. Corbin, appreciate the time. He's Corbin Smith. You can catch him on Locked On Seahawks. Does a great job over there. Coming up next, Giant fans, we're going to talk to Peter Bukowski, who is with Locked On Packers, and he's going to give us the lowdown on Jon Runyan Jr., one of the offensive linemen that the Giants signed in free agency. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, if you're having trouble finding those last-minute tickets to your favorite concert shows and sporting events, Game Time has you covered. They offer a wide selection of seats complete with seat views to help you decide where to sit, and they're constantly offering last-minute tickets through flash deals. There are no hidden fees. You'll know exactly what your deal is before you check out. And Game Time even has tickets available as late as an hour after an event starts, making it truly the best place to find last-minute deals at amazing prices. Want more reasons to trust Game Time? They offer event cancellation protection, and if you find tickets in the same section and row for less elsewhere, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. That app is Game Time, and that promo code for $20 off your first purchase is Locked On. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and joining me now on the podcast is my colleague over at Locked On Packers, Peter Bukowski. He is here to give us a little insight on the Giants' new acquisition at offensive guard, Jon Runyan Jr. Peter, welcome on into the program.
It's good to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation. I'm sure I was, like a lot of your listeners, surprised at the amount of money Jon Runyan Jr. got, but I think he's a good player, and I'm excited to talk about it.
All right. Well, Peter, let's start off by getting an overview of Jon Runyan Jr. Where are his strengths? What does he do well? And where does he still need a little development, in your opinion?
So this is a player for Green Bay who had a kind of a circuitous route to being the starter. He was a day 3 pick out of Michigan, someone who we knew from the jump was going to go from tackle to guard, but pass protection was his strong suit, is his strong suit. He is one of the better interior pass protecting offensive linemen in the league. What's interesting is early on in his career, he really had to fight to get on the field, and it took some injuries for him to do that. And I was on my show going, why is this guy not playing? Like, there was Royce Newman who was playing over him for stretches early in Royce Newman's career. And Royce Newman is like a borderline NFL player at this point. I never understood that. I didn't quite understand what was happening there. It took in 2022, they did some offensive line reshuffling where they actually had to move guys from left guard to right guard because Elton Jenkins, who is the Packers left guard, was playing right tackle. We don't need to get into the, it almost feels like my sister's boyfriend's best friend told me that, it just gets very convoluted, and I think it's hard to follow. But when he's been on the field the last 2 years, he has been one of the better pass protectors in the league. Now, where the Packers would like to have seen improvement, and I think one of the reasons why he ended up splitting time with Sean Ryan last year, who was a 3rd-round pick 2 years ago for the Packers, is in the run game. He's just not a body mover. He's just not someone who is going to physically dominate guys. He's just, because he's not big. Like, the Packers prioritize athleticism and pass protection in offensive linemen. That has been true from time immemorial, going back to Ron Wolf and Ted Thompson and Brian Gutekunst. And that has allowed them to find guys like Josh Sitton and TJ Lang and David Bakhtiari, because they're not worried about guys being on a little bit on the lighter side. Jon Runyan, probably like 295, like not the kind of, certainly not the Will Hernandez size that Giants fans are going to recognize. But I think that he is someone who has grown a lot as a player. And I talked to him at Super Bowl, and Giants fans can go back and listen to that interview that we did over on Locked On Packers. And, one of the reasons why last year he was splitting time with Sean Ryan was he was hurt. And they were trying to keep him fresh. And he said he felt like he was playing some of the best football he's ever played. And the tape bears it out. He was playing really well at the end of last year, but he was still splitting time because he's coming back and fighting through injuries. He's someone who's going to play hurt for you, going to give his all for you. And I encourage Giants fans to go back and watch the last press conference that Jon Runyan did. He's in tears, Patricia, in tears practically at his locker, talking about this being his last game and what it meant to be a Green Bay Packer and the pride that he showed. This is the son of a former NFL offensive lineman, Jon Runyan, who was in Philadelphia for a long time. Giants fans of a certain age certainly anyone our age or older is going to remember that. He knows what it means to put on the jersey and knows the work that it takes, and he's going to do that. And so I think from a Giants standpoint, he is someone who can come in right away, and you can be happy that he is representing your organization the right kind of way.
Where is he best suited, though? Is left guard or right guard? Where's his strength?
Yeah, I think, in a traditional framing of it, you usually want to put your best pass protectors on the left side because that's the quarterback's blind side. That matters a little bit less now in the NFL, right? Because of so much spread and all the gun that's used. I think in a perfect world, he is a left guard. I just think generally speaking, especially teams do still run right more often than they run to the left. And part of that is because of the play action that you can do and all of those things. And that's a right-handed quarterback thing just as much as anything else. So I think left guard is probably the place that I would ideally put him. I also wouldn't be surprised, and this is something that they tried to cross-train him at the end at center and just give him a shot to play center. It's not something he's done, but I do think he could do it if you wanted to do it. Now, the Giants just drafted John Michael Schmidt, so that doesn't seem like something that they feel like they would have to do. But, I think he could play left or right guard for the Giants. I have not certainly watched the Joshua Zadu tape as closely as probably you have, but I think that is probably where he is best suited, though I think he can do either. Like when he was healthy, he was a really solid right guard for the Packers. They just happen to have Elton Jenkins, who's a Pro Bowl caliber player on the left side.
How is his mobility in terms of if he's asked to pull or even getting to the second level? How does he do in those areas?
Yeah, so the Packers prioritize athleticism as much as I mentioned, as any team does in the league. He had an 8.45 relative athletic score. And that's just the testing, of course. But he ran a 5.08 40 at 6.4 306 at the combine. Like that's moving. He has good mobility in space. And I think if you're gonna be a power team at all in the run game with him, duo is the run you want to run. He's not someone who you want like pulling around the edge and trying to bury a linebacker. That's not going to be necessarily his strength because, as I mentioned, he's not at the point of attack going to be the strongest guy. But if you can get a double with him, that's okay. That's when you can start moving some bodies with him. I would like that. If you wanted to get out in space, yeah, sure. And screens have been a part of the Packers repertoire going back to Mike Holmgren, right? Since the 90s, they've been a screen team. They have not been a particularly good screen team. Some of that is timing. And I think he's been inconsistent in that area. I think that's fair to say. But in terms of getting him on the move in the run game, I'm not as worried about that. In the screen game, I don't know that it just has a natural feel there. And it takes time. Like, the Giants have the new running back, Devin Singletary. So that's going to take some acclimation too with a quarterback and getting everyone on the same page with how they want to time that up. But in terms of the pure movement skills, he has the movement skills to play on the edge.
What about, is he better off in the zone blocking scheme or the power scheme?
So yeah, certainly zone blocking is going to be where he's going to be best because he's just, it's just man on man. Let me just try and control the guy in front of me. But it is the case that bigger, more powerful blockers, like if he has to play Dexter Lawrence, that's a matchup that he's going to struggle with. Now, to be fair, everyone struggles with Dexter Lawrence. He's really, really, really good. But that is going to be the one thing that's going to give him problem is that ability to play with real power. But I wouldn't say, over his 4 years in Green Bay, it's hard for me to say, he struggled with this kind of pass rusher or this kind of run defender or another. He does not have great length. That's one of the reasons why they moved him from tackle to guard. But it's not terrible either. I mean, 33.25 inch arms for a guard is pretty good actually. So it's going to be a zone offense for sure. I think that's probably what fits Devin Singletary the best as well. But he has enough. If you want to run duo, if you want to run some of the other gap scheme runs, power, they can do that. The Packers started experimenting with some of these pin pull runs and getting him out on the edge. He can do that. So you can have a diverse run game with him and not really worry about him being a net minus in a major way. But certainly the run blocking of the two, run versus pass is pretty clearly where he is just not quite as good.
Where does he need to really improve his game, do you think?
Well, I mean, so the run blocking would be one of those places. I don't know how you're going to do that at this point, other than, maybe a little body work. I mean, he's still a young guy, so you get a little bit stronger, and maybe that can help. We've seen offensive linemen certainly over time remake their bodies, get stronger in their lower half. Get the core a little bit stronger. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And we're not talking about just like sitting in there and doing bench presses. Like that's not necessarily the best way to do it. And then, guys can always get better with coaching. I mean, we see it all the time. Guys go from one place to another and something gets coached a little bit differently. The teaching point is different. It just clicks. Sometimes it's not like the last coaching staff was bad. The Packers have done a really good job with Adam Stenavich, and now Luke Butkus and Ryan Mahaffey, like they've done a pretty good job developing these offensive linemen. Rasheed Walker and Zach Tom are day 3 picks who are starting at a high level now for the Packers. But sometimes it's just about how it's taught. I mean, you hear Mitchell Schwartz talk about this. Sometimes it's just one coach, the way that they talk about it versus another coach, the way that they talk about it. It's like every student learns in a classroom differently. Every teacher teaches a little bit differently. Sometimes just those little differences can be enough to unlock something in a player. We saw it last year in LA. Like they go out and they sign a free agent who has never been particularly great and he balls out for the Rams. So I think that is very possible, especially offensive line. It's such a nuanced position and the way different teams teach it. There's enough variance that I think you can say, okay, there's something here that you can really develop into something much better than we've seen before in the run blocking game, because that's where he needs to get better.
And then finally, Peter, you spoke before about one of his intangibles and how he is proud to put on the uniform, how he loves the game. What are some other intangibles in terms of maybe how he is a leader or, any other intangibles that you can think of that, might be worth discussing?
I think he is certainly someone who, and I'll just be frank about it. I think he got jerked around a little bit in Green Bay. It never was clear to me why he was not playing more early in his career. And you never heard him complain about it. He was not the kind of guy who's going to say, look, I should be out there. It was always, when I'm called upon, I will do it. And I think part of that comes from having a dad who played, who is now in charge of discipline at the NFL, by the way, had to in fact give his son a fine letter recently, last year, I believe. So, that's tough stuff. But I think that's something, especially in New York, where, you have an attempted mutiny on the coaching staff last year. Like, it's nice to have players who are going, this is my role. This is my lane. I'm going to stay in it. And I'm just going to do my best, keep my head down and do that kind of thing. I think he's grown up a lot in Green Bay. And I think you hear that from a lot of players. They come to Green Bay and the environment there allows them to just sort of lock in on football. Whereas in a lot of places, there's a lot of distractions, and those distractions just don't exist in Green Bay. And, I think that, early on there were some maturity issues. But as there is, 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds, we can't expect, I don't know how you were at 22, 23. I was certainly not a fully formed human at that point in my life. I think now 25, 26, he's a little bit older, a little bit wiser. I was very impressed with him, frankly, in our interview that we did at Super Bowl. Definitely seemed like a different guy, a more mature guy, a more self-actualized guy in a lot of ways. I think it takes maybe being humbled in the NFL to go, okay, this is a different experience than maybe I thought it was, coming from, a power college with NFL bloodlines. Maybe you thought one thing was going to happen and it doesn't work out that way. And some guys would pout. He didn't. He kept working. And now, he earns this monster deal with New York, and it's great to see.
All right. Well, I know I'm looking forward to seeing what he brings to the table, because look, the offensive line for the Giants has been an absolute mess for the longest time, and they really needed the reinforcements. So Peter, I appreciate you coming on. He's Peter Bukowski. You can check him out over on Locked On Packers. He's also on Locked On NFL. Check him out, folks. Thank you, Peter, for your time.
Of course.
All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope you enjoyed all the content from my colleagues, and hope you will keep it here all week long as we continue to bring you new episodes following the New York Giants free agency activities. We'll have more guests coming up. We'll break down some of the new acquisitions that we haven't yet covered. I still have some salary cap information to share. Just a whole lot of content. There's never any end to the content here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So on that note, again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.